Welcome to this week's edition of Quarantine Baking. We're going to be prepping some stuff for Mother's Day, which is coming up on Sunday. We are going to make some scones, we are going to make some lemon curd to fill those with, and we're going to make some pate brisee that will eventually turn into quiche. So some pretty cool offerings. I think that these are like great brunch essentials. Learning how to make a really good quiche will be awesome for, they're actually very easy to transport, so they're good for picnics or they're good for a brunch at a friend's place. They're like a pretty easy food to move to other places, and they're filling, you can do so many different flavor combinations, and they're not very difficult. The crust, if you want to do it the classic way, will take a little bit of work, but it's well worth it, and you can make a few of them and keep them in the freezer if you want to have some on hand, which is something that I often do. But the rest of these items, lemon curd and scones, are very simple. The lemon curd takes a little bit of time, but not a lot of work. And the scones will come together just quicker than you can believe. So we're gonna tackle all of this stuff today, and then hopefully we can make some nice brunch for Mother's Day. I know there are a lot of mothers at home right now with children, definitely not going crazy, definitely not losing their minds, definitely keeping it all together. So maybe we can show a little appreciation. And to that end, I just wanted to take a quick second to promote my partnership this week with Praxis Kitchen Project. All of these items that I'm showing you how to make are available for order. So you can send them to someone in the greater Seattle area, be it yourself, be it your mom, be it someone else's mom, be it someone who you think could just use a pick-me-up or a treat, or maybe someone who's food insecure. And that's who we're working to help with this project. All of the proceeds above food costs are going directly to people dealing with food insecurity, be that in the form of groceries or gift cards to grocery stores. And then anything above that, people who reach out to us directly with food insecurity, anything above all of that is going to go to an organization in Seattle called Nicholsville, which is a organization that provides shelter and services to the growing, unfortunately, population of homeless people in Seattle. There are a lot of people experiencing homeless in Seattle all the time, and the pandemic has only served to make this worse. They are our most vulnerable population, and that has been exponentially increased given the current crisis that we're all living through. So we are teaming up. We're going to try and get some food and some money sent over to help those guys. And anything that you can do, if you want to just make a donation, if you want to order some food, please let us know. If you go to the Praxis Kitchen Project page on Facebook, there's information on how to donate, how to order. I've also posted a few links, so either on my profile or in the quarantine profile, you should be able to find that stuff. We are taking orders through tonight, and if you want to donate, you can do that at any time. Deliveries are going to be made on Friday, I think, and then donation by the end of the weekend. So yeah, just wanted to take a moment to talk about that, and let's go ahead and jump into lemon curd first. We're going to jump around a little bit today just because I want to try to do it in the most efficient way with like cooling and things that are going to take longer to cook. So let's start here with the lemon curd. So this is a really nice, straightforward recipe. You do have to zest and juice some lemons and crack a couple of eggs, but the rest of it is really, really simple. And honestly, the end result is, I think, a lot better than the work it requires to create it. This is way better than any lemon curd that you can buy at the grocery store. It's vegetarian, and if you are dairy sensitive, feel free to leave the butter out. You can use vegan butter, you can use some coconut oil, or you can just leave it out altogether. It's still going to taste great. The butter will thin it a little bit and make it a little bit richer, but it is absolutely delicious without it, so feel free to leave the butter out if you have dairy sensitivities as well. So this is where we're going to start today, and I'm just going to pop over to my stove camera here. So in this bowl, I've got my double boiler ready to go. I'm going to turn that on to medium-low heat. And then I have eggs and egg yolks in here. And to that, I am going to add my sugar, and my salt is also on top of here. And I'm just going to grab a whisk, because the second that sugar hits our eggs, we want to start mixing it together. The sugar, because it wants to pull the moisture out of the eggs, will start to set those fats and proteins, and kind of cook the yolks and the whites. If you've ever heard of curing something in salt where it's drying out the moisture, and that's why some salted products are preserved and are able to be eaten quote unquote raw, it's because they're actually kind of cooked. They go through a process where all the moisture leaves, and it's not a favorable environment for bacteria, and it'll kind of activate those proteins. So we're trying to avoid that because we don't want scrambled eggs here. We want a nice smooth custard. So yeah, we've got our sugar in, and we're just gonna kind of keep stirring it a little bit. I like to wait until this starts to warm up just a little bit before I add in my citrus. So I have my lemon juice and I have my lemon zest here at the ready. But we're just gonna let it warm up a little bit before we add it in. I find that comes as less of a shock to the eggs and yolks. And so I'm just gonna give this a couple of minutes before I pour that stuff in. And from there, we're basically just gonna check on it every few minutes, give it a stir so that it doesn't scald or get scrambled anywhere, and let it do its thing. We won't need the butter until the very end. And this is already like a third of the way done at this point. So we can pop back over here. And the next step that we're gonna do is gonna be to start our Pate Brisee. Pate Brisee is a classic French pastry dough. It's very commonly used in custard tarts, so things like quiches. You can use it as a sweet pie dough for like a custard pie or a cream pie of some sort. It's not going to be quite as flaky, although the texture is still really, really nice. It's got a lot of butter in it. It's what's referred to as a mealy pie dough, so we're not going to have big chunks of butter left in our flour. We're going to make sure that it's all really, really well combined, but it's still going to be really short and tender and delicious. So we're going to start by bringing that together really quick so that it can get in the fridge and chill before we actually need to use it. So I have all of my stuff ready to go for that here. And so this is just my flour. I guess I should show you the recipe just in case anyone missed it. you can see, if you're familiar with pie doughs, it is a little bit different. A lot of pie dough is just flour, salt, butter, and cold water. It's less common to have milk and eggs in more traditional American style pie dough. But, you know, this is a French one, and the eggs are going to do a couple of things. They're going to constitute some of the moisture content that we're adding here. So, you know, they're going to be hydrating the starches in the flour. They are also fat, so they're going to be adding some shortness to it in addition to the butter, as will the milk, because the milk also has fat. And then they're also going to act as really good binders. So you'll find that, like, while we're going to work this dough as little as we possibly can, it's going to be really, really smooth. And it will, as we roll it out, like, it'll really smooth out a lot and be a really uniform kind of elastic dough. So that's the role that those are playing in there. And so yeah, to my flour, I'm gonna add my salt here and my sugar. Also, a lot of pie dough doesn't have sugar, kind of just comes down to personal preference a lot of times. The sugar in here is not going to provide a lot of sweetness. It's more to control the texture and the moisture content. Those hygroscopic properties that we were talking about with sugar. I'm just going to mix those things together by hand here. Just to make sure that we don't have any pockets of sugar or salt. You don't need to really sift it, but we do want it all mixed together really well. And I think our egg yolks and sugar for the lemon curd are ready, so I'm just going to take a peek over here. This is warming up. You can see it's kind of starting to foam, so we're at the point now where I feel good about adding in the lemon juice. So I've got my lemon juice here. This is fresh squeezed. If you want to use lemon juice from a bottle, that's fine. I would recommend, though, make sure that you're not using it from concentrate. The citric acid and kind of just the content of the juice itself and the zest are what are actually going to set the structure of this curd. So it might be kind of runny and not come together the way you want it to if you use lemon juice from concentrate. And since you need lemon zest anyway, you would have lemons on hand to juice. It takes a couple minutes, but it's well worth it. And the flavor of fresh lemon juice, especially when Meyer lemons come out and you can make Meyer lemon curd, that is kind of unbeatable. So you can see the color here got a lot lighter when I added it in. It's really liquidy now. And it'll be like that. This is gonna cook for a little while. We'll give it a stir every couple minutes and you'll see it start to thicken. And once it starts to thicken, it does come together really pretty quickly. So, but we don't have to sit here and babysit it. We can go back to our Pate Brisee. Here, I have my butter and it's just cut up in these little cubes. And I'm just gonna add it all in here. And just make sure it's all broken up. You don't want to add chunks that are too big in here because it's just going to be that much harder for you to then dispense it into the flour. So cutting up little like 1/2 or 1/4 inch chunks like this is definitely the easiest way to get it done. And again, you want your butter really nice and cold. You want your milk cold, you want your eggs cold. We don't want anything melting because that is not going to help the texture of our dough at all. So the chemical properties of butter actually change as it melts, and we want to keep it nice and cold so that our dough stays nice and short. It doesn't get too chewy. It just stays like a nice, flaky, crumbly, rich, beautiful dough. So when I say rub the butter in, what I'm doing is I'm literally taking chunks of butter here and I'm squeezing flour into them. I'm rubbing it in. And eventually, this does take a little bit of time, but eventually it will resemble kind of a coarse cornmeal, and that is the texture that we're going for. So we have to start by getting all of this butter rubbed in. And by the way, if you have like a stand-up mixer, a KitchenAid, you can put this flour and butter on your mixer with a paddle attachment. Again, make sure the butter is very cold, and you can let that go on the lowest speed until it gets all incorporated. So you don't have to do this step by hand if you don't enjoy it. Or if you're busy, you don't have enough time, whatever the case may be. If you have that mixer, you are definitely welcome to use it for this step. It can be a little tedious. I kind of think it's, I don't know, maybe a little therapeutic. Feels kind of satisfying, I guess, to rub it in like this. And you can really get a good sense for how well incorporated it is. Plus, it's, you know, elbow grease, that blood, sweat, and tears that makes the end product so satisfying, because quiche really is quite rich. And you have to earn it sometimes if you're gonna eat the really good stuff. Just gonna take a quick pause and give our lemon curd a stir. So right over here. Starting to thicken up here. You can kind of see that on the sides. So it won't be too much longer now before this is almost done. It's only been about 25 minutes or so at most, and you can see it's much less liquidy. It's starting to form like a really nice custard. We have that beautiful yellow color, which is just from the eggs and the lemon juice. No food coloring added here. So yeah, we're starting to get really close on this. It'll just be another few minutes. I'm gonna make sure that I'm checking on it and not letting it overcook. Might just take a couple more minutes. So we can come back over, keep rubbing our butter in. And if at some point you do need to take a break from this, you can just throw this whole bowl in the fridge. You know, you don't want to leave it for too long so that your butter starts getting soft or too warm, but you can definitely leave it in the fridge if you have to step away for a while. Definitely setting up. Oh yeah, look at how nice and thick that is. That is a great texture. And if it looks like a little chunky, just keep whisking it. Sometimes the zest will kind of bond to some of the thickened egg yolk, but I am gonna pull this from the heat, and we will add in our butter. I like to add the butter before I strain it, just because I feel like it thins it a little bit and makes it easier to strain. You see a lot of recipes that tell you to add it after. That's fine too. I just like to do it while it's still really nice and warm. This is a significant amount of butter here for the amount of curd, and so you want to make sure that it'll melt in nice and easy. And the butter, adding the butter in will also help to cool it. Smoothing out into a really nice creamy texture here. And then while it's still warm, it's very important to do this stuff while it's warm. You want to run it through a fine mesh strainer so that you can strain out all of that zest and any chunks that may have formed. So I have this one. If you have one that's a little less fine of a mesh, that's fine. You should still be able to catch most of the zest, and for sure any big chunks would be caught by that. So just pour it out into here. And then this just has to cool for us to use it. So we don't want it to be piping hot. Technically we're baking it, so if we were really in a hurry we could use it right this second, but we will let it set for a little bit. That'll help improve the texture and the flavor. Just kind of pressing this through. Move it over so it's more visible here. Make a mess in the process, as is my standard MO, kind of at any point. All right, so that's it. We have a beautiful and simple lemon curd. And if we've done it right, which I think we have, there should just kind of be zest left over in here. Shouldn't be a ton of egg. Sometimes if you have some fresh eggs and it's hard to break up those whites, the whites tend to gelatinize a little bit easier than the yolks. So sometimes you'll see some chunks of egg white, but that's why we strain it, because we want a really nice smooth texture. And I think we've accomplished that here, and it's going to be a really beautiful lemon curd. And the color on it is great. It's really bright yellow. It's very smooth. So I'm just going to wrap this with a little bit of plastic wrap and then put it in the fridge. So now we are back over to our Pate Brisee. At this point we have our butter rubbed in. It's all really nice and even. We've got that coarse cornmeal texture, which is exactly what we're looking for. And so at this point, we're gonna make a well in the center, just kind of like a bowl shape in the middle of your dry ingredients. And to that, we're gonna add the milk and the egg. So I've got my milk and my egg just mixed together in here. Gonna add it in all at once. And then just very gently work it all together. So I'm just kind of like putting the flour into the liquid in the middle and just very gently stirring it together. I don't want to knead this at all. I just want it to come together, and then we're gonna stop. We're gonna wrap it in plastic and let it sit in the fridge. It will chill and it will continue to hydrate. So this is definitely not like some of the other doughs that we've made where you want to knead it a lot. We want this to have as little gluten development as possible. So I'm just kind of like taking the more hydrated portions and picking up the extra flour. Remember, there's a lot of butter in here, so it'll actually kind of press together without a ton of hydration. The butter will, at this stage, kind of act as a binder for it. And you can just kind of like tuck in some of those dry parts into the center so they will get nice and hydrated. And this should be enough dough, depending on the size quiche that you want to make. This should be enough for two at like a 9 or a 10 inch diameter. But if you're making smaller ones, you can get more than that. You can freeze this dough. It will last for quite a while in the freezer. I wouldn't keep it in the fridge for more than a couple days just because it will start to oxidize. It'll turn really gray. It'll still taste nice, but you won't have this beautiful kind of yellow, buttery looking dough, which is definitely very nice. So I'm gonna split this in half and wrap it nice and tight in some plastic wrap here. And we're going to flatten it into discs, and that's because it will cool a lot faster if it's flattened out and has more surface area exposed to the cold than if it's just in like a big ball. Plus, once it's cold and stiff and difficult to roll out, having it already kind of flattened out will make it that much easier for us. So that is why we just take it. I'm just kind of gonna press it out here. You can see there's still some dry parts. That's okay. We're gonna resist adding more liquid. It feels very soft. I can tell that there's plenty of liquid holding this together at this point. And these dry parts are, like I say, are going to continue to hydrate as the dough sits in the fridge. So just take this, and then once I have it kind of halfway wrapped, I like to press it out again. Make sure it's nice and tight in there. And then it'll go into the fridge like this. This chunk. And if you have a bowl scraper, this is why they're so handy. So you can just get right in there scrape everything out. Won't hurt your bowls. Just kind of press that in a little bit. Okay. And here we go, we have our Pate Brisee dough. So this should chill in the fridge for at least an hour. It should feel really, really firm and stiff by the time it's ready. So at least an hour, 2 is probably better. We want it to be really nice and cold when we're working with it. It will become more and more difficult to work with the more it heats up. So the colder it is when we start, the better. We don't want it frozen, but we do want it nice and chilled. So this is going in the fridge. And I'll show you what it looks like. This one is very soft and malleable, and this is a nice, properly chilled one. So it's quite stiff, and I can bring that out and demonstrate now how to roll it. So we've got our dough. And you can see, like, it's all, there's no like super dry parts. There are parts that were crumbly and dry. We've got like a nice tacky dough at this point. So it is ready to go. So to roll it out, we're just going to flour our bench a little bit and then get some on top of the dough. We don't want too much flour. We just want to keep it from sticking. And I have this style of rolling pin. If you have one with handles, sometimes when the dough is this stiff, it can be a little difficult to get it to roll easily. So, you know, you might find that you're not getting enough pressure. You may want to press more towards the center of the pin if you're working with one with handles. My chef at pastry school used to just beat it like this, which you can do to kind of plasticize it and get it started. I find that it's usually not necessary with this particular dough to beat on it, and with enough pressure, it'll just roll right out. So you might remember how kind of like cracked and a little bit uneven it looked when I first brought it out of the fridge, but it's already smoothing out a lot into a really uniform dough. It's nice and hydrated, and there's no holes forming, it's not splitting, it's not tearing, and that is why we really want to keep from over mixing it when we add the liquid, because it will develop too much gluten and then become really difficult to roll out, number one, and also just become very tough and not have a nice texture like what we would want from a beautiful quiche crust. So I'm just going to roll it out to about 1/8 of an inch, I think, thickness. And I just want to make sure it's nice and even everywhere. Keep moving it around to keep it from sticking to your bench. If you rotate it, you should be able to keep it from sticking without too much flour. Okay. So, you can kind of feel around, see how I can very easily lift this up. It's almost like a blanket or something. It's a very nice dough to work with for that reason, because it does bond together so well. You don't have to tiptoe around it, which is great for me because I'm not big on tiptoeing personally. So I am going to make out of this one, I think this is like an 8-inch pan here. And the general rule of thumb is that you want, well, depending on how tall your pan is, so I've got maybe like 2 inches here, so I want it to be 2 inches wider and then probably 3 inches wider than the whole thing, because we're actually going to make a little border. So I want it to come up above the top of the pan just a little bit. And so I want to make sure that I have my dough rolled out big enough, which it definitely is. And I'm going to take a little bit of softened butter here and just with my fingers coat my pan. And this is going to help the dough adhere to the pan when I'm pressing it in, but it's also going to help release it from the pan when it's baked. So kind of 2 birds, and you don't need a ton of butter. You don't want like a super thick layer. We're not buttering toast here. I'm just kind of trying to make it so that I've got good coverage and the dough will stick. So there's that. And then the easiest way to estimate your size is to just lay it out and then, you know, say, okay, this looks like about 3 inches, and cut around. You don't have to cut it into a circle shape, but it does make it a little bit easier when it comes time to press it in. Don't throw this away. You can roll this out one more time before it starts to get really tough. And even at that point, you could punch out little shapes or something with a cookie cutter to bake off and throw on top of the quiche. Make little, basically pie dough treats. You can cover them in raw sugar or whatever you want to do with that. I hate waste, so I'll definitely be making more quiche crust out of this, but don't feel like you have to throw it away. So now, sometimes you have a little bit of excess flour on the bottom. Just make sure you brush that off if you do. But this looks pretty good. And I'm just going to lay this over my pan. I'm going to try and get it as centered as possible without pulling or stretching the dough. I want it to be nice and slack in there. And at this point, we're going to take it and lift it up so it's vertical, and I'm going to push it down. So I'm going to turn here so I can try to show you what that looks like. I'm holding it up vertically and I'm pushing it down. And do you see how I'm starting to form like an actual ridge along the bottom of the pan? That's what you're looking for. You need that seam in order to keep your pie shell from totally collapsing in on itself when we're blind baking it. We're going to use weights to blind bake it, but this seam is really going to be key to the structure. And I'm taking the dough from the top and pushing it down. I'm not just stretching it to like make that seam and tearing it. I'm actually like putting pressure from the top of the dough up here and forcing as much of it as I can down there without creating like a bunch of wrinkles. You don't want it to be too thick. You want it to still stay nice and smooth. So at this point, this is really smooth. I don't have any air bubbles or anything in here. I have my seam all the way around, and you know, the crust feels nice and even. So now we're going to work on making our border. And the border happens, you basically just take a little portion of dough here, and we're going to press it up against the ridge of the pan. And just try to do this as evenly as you can as you go around. And you can see I'm kind of building a ridge here at the top by doing that. And this is why we want that excess dough as we go around, so that we can make a really nice border. The border is also going to help hold your crust in place and keep it from falling. If you've ever made a pie crust and had it fall as you're trying to par bake it, you know, these are the measures that we put in place to help prevent that, because that's just the worst feeling when you've spent all this time cutting the butter and then rubbing the butter in and then rolling the dough out, and then your crust just collapses in on itself. That's just kind of heartbreaking and frustrating, and probably makes you not really even in the mood for pie anymore, which is a real tragedy. So we're going to do everything we can to prevent that. So at this point, what you're going to do is kind of lay that border in a little bit. And I'm using a foil pan, so I'm not sure how well this will work, but if you're using like a more classic pie plate or pie pan, you can just roll your rolling pin right over top to trim it. But I am going to actually have to go around because I don't want to break or crumple my aluminum foil pan here. Like I say, if you're using a metal or a Pyrex, a ceramic pie plate, you can just use your rolling pin to kind of like press up against that border and trim the rest of the crust. So then we're gonna put our border back up where it belongs. And I just kind of press it up. I'm not pinching at this point. I'm just moving it back upright and then smoothing as I go. Okay, so we have a nice smooth border up at the top. And now comes the kind of fun decorative part. So I'm going to take these two fingers and I'm going to put them at the edge of this border, and I'm going to take my pointer finger of the other hand and I'm going to press it in. So I'm not pinching with these fingers. The pressure is coming from my other hand. So these are just staying put, and I'm forcing the dough in with my other hand, and that's what gives me that really nice pleat. And then you just move along, just keep these fingers the same distance apart, and you can just keep going along like that, and you can see how we're kind of forming that classic ridge by doing that. Again, I'm not pinching. You can pinch with these fingers. There is a different shape that you will get from it, but you still want to be applying pressure, moving the dough into your fingers this way, in order to properly create that ridge and border so that your dough doesn't shrink into itself. And here we have a nice crimped crust. So at this point, we don't want to throw this straight into the oven. This dough has warmed up quite a bit. It's really, really soft. And if I try to throw this right into the oven right now, it's just gonna like all sink into itself, even with weights, even with the border and everything. We want to chill it first. So I'm actually just gonna pop this into the freezer for a few minutes and let it chill while I work on prepping some fillings for the quiche. So, fillings for the quiche can be whatever you want them to be. People like different things. Some people want to have meat, some people want to have cheese, vegetables, whatever you want to do. I will kind of walk you through the stuff that I'm doing because, you know, this is the kind of quiche that I like, but this is where you get creative, make things to your taste. I will try to show you a couple of different like stylistic things that you can do, and we'll walk through thinking about how to build it in a way that is going to make sense as it bakes and like provide really even distribution of the flavors. But let's start by talking about the custard. So the custard is generally 3 to 4 eggs to 15 ounces of cream. So that's basically 2 cups of cream, 3 to 4 eggs. The 3 to 4 depends on how you like your custard. A lot of people want a stiffer, more something closer to like what scrambled eggs are. And at that point you can even add like 5 or 6 eggs if you want a firmer like inside of your quiche. I like a really delicate kind of creamy custard, so that even when it bakes up, it's really soft, and I think that just makes like a really delicious, rich thing. So I generally use less egg to cream. But something that I do almost every time is make it so that it's infused with something. So I've got some custard that I'm working on infusing right now for this Mother's Day donation. And what I have done is I brought my cream, and only my cream, not the eggs. I brought my cream up to just below a simmer to the scalding point, and I've added in roasted garlic, and I've added in sage. And those have been steeping in here for a couple of hours, and because I want to kind of like intensify those flavors, I'm actually going to like strain them out and squeeze them into it, and I'll just show you that right now so you can see what I'm talking about, because sometimes words just don't cover everything. So I'm just going to grab, I think this bowl is actually big enough, and then you can see. So here I have my bowl. I'm using a pretty fine mesh strainer for this, but not super fine, because I actually want to force some of my roasted garlic through here. You don't have to do that, and especially if you're not using roasted garlic, no obligation. I just find it helpful for the flavor to have that. You know, I would probably put garlic in my quiche anyways, so I've got it infused into my custard. I can also incorporate the garlic itself into the custard and then not have to worry about adding it on the back end with the rest of my vegetables. So I've got this guy, And I'm just gonna give everything a stir here. And it's always a good idea before you add your egg to test your seasoning. So I put sage and roasted garlic in here, but I've also added salt and pepper. And I want to make sure that I have enough of that before I move on to the next step. So I'm just gonna taste it. Yep, tastes good. Do that to your taste. If you would rather add salt at the end, feel free. I recommend a little bit of salt, at least a teaspoon, just because it's going to help highlight the other flavors as it bakes. But maybe you're adding pancetta and bacon and cheese, and those are all going to be salty, and you don't want it to taste too salty at the end. So I'm just going to pour this through my strainer. And I've made quite a lot of custard because I'm making a lot of quiches, so don't be alarmed. This is obviously a lot more than 2 cups of cream. Okay. So this strained out all of the stuff that I used to infuse it, which is great. I'm going to take my sage, and because I actually want to kind of intensify that flavor in here, I'm going to squeeze it, and you'll see like kind of the green strain out into here. And you know, sage is such a delicate flavor, and one that I definitely want to be present. So even though it's been steeping, I'm just going to squeeze it into here. Great. And then that'll just go in the compost. And then with the rest of my roasted garlic here, I'm just going to press into my strainer. And that is going to catch all of the bigger chunks, maybe any like crusty bits that have formed, but it's also going to break up the roasted garlic that's become tender into almost an emulsion, and that will make it really easy to distribute into the cream without it being chunky or affecting the texture at all. So now I've got my garlic in there. It's a very full bowl. So definitely going to transfer it back to the big pot. And then I'm going to add my egg. Now, the standard with custard, if you want to make the best custard that you can, mix it and then age it overnight in the fridge. That will allow all of the fat globules, which I know sounds kind of weird and gross, but is actually delicious. That will allow them to stabilize. And it's really going to improve the texture of your custard a lot. So if you can like make your custard, make your crust, your dough and everything the day before, and then bake your quiche a few hours before you want to serve it so it has time to set the next day, that is kind of like a great way to do it. You can have everything prepped and ready to go, so that it comes together really quickly the day that you actually want to serve it. Quiche will want some time to cool before you cut into it, because it is a delicate custard, but you know, if you have everything ready to go, you can just throw it all in the shell and pop it in the oven. Then you can work on making your coffee and maybe your scones or other treats that you have in mind. So yeah, to this I'm just going to add my egg. I'm going to make sure that it's really, really, really well mixed up. I don't want any chunks of egg. Even if you have like an immersion blender or something, you can use that to combine this. And then I'm going to cover it and put it in the fridge and store it overnight to let it age, let all of those fat globules set and come together really nicely. It's going to create a really great, beautiful texture. Plus, it's just more time that these flavors are marinating together and, you know, becoming like a really lovely mix that's going to taste so good. I, being me, of course, am incorporating leeks. And I'm also doing I think I'm going to do some roasted tomatoes. That sounds really nice. And I'm going to roast some mushrooms with those tomatoes. So that'll be really good. I like mushrooms. I like leeks. And then, of course, I have some sharp white cheddar cheese. Generally, I would say my favorite in quiche is comté, but I was feeling lazy and didn't want to grate the cheese myself, so I just bought the punchiest pre-grated cheese that I could find. And it's going to be delicious, so I'm not worried about it. So I'm just going to wash some of my veg here. That should be enough for what we're doing. And I'll pop back down here to the cutting board view. So I'm just going to get all of this ready to go on a sheet tray together, because roasting is like a nice, simple way to do stuff, and it tastes great. My throat is so dry. So I just have a sheet tray. It has a Silpat on it. Feel free to use parchment, whatever works. And then I'm just kind of going to trim the mushrooms a little bit and then cut them into either quarters or sixths, depending on how big the mushroom is. So I want some nice hearty chunks. Actually, I think a bowl will be the best route for these. Okay, and then I have some nice tomatoes here, which I'm just going to cut into 1/4-inch slices to be roasted. Nice and ripe. These were on the vine tomatoes, which I always think are really nice. I'm also a fan of Roma for roasting. Those tend to roast up really nicely. Okay. Throw these in with my mushrooms. And then I have, from roasting my garlic, I have my roasted garlic. I'm going to add a little bit of that in. Just a few cloves because I don't want to make everything too garlicky with the garlic that I have in my custard. I also have some oil, some garlic oil from roasting the garlic that I'm going to use to cook these. And that'll impart a lot of nice flavor. And that's just olive oil that I use to roast the garlic. It's really simple. If you look it up online, those recipes are really easy to find. So I've got my mushrooms and my tomatoes in here. And to that, I'm going to add some salt and pepper. And then I'm just going to toss them together and put them out on that sheet tray. So I've just got some kosher salt here. Crack some nice black pepper. I quite like black pepper, so I tend to use a lot of it. You can also use white pepper if you don't want, flecks color. The flavor is different, but still very nice. I'm just going to toss these, get them really well coated in the oil. And then onto the sheet tray. And I just want to make sure everything's like kind of evenly spread out, so it's going to cook up nice and even. Nothing's too isolated. I don't want anything to burn. And just like that, it's going to go into the oven. My oven is set at 365 right now. 350 is fine, but I've just got it kicked up a little higher to make things move a little quickly today. Very good. So I have these buddies. I'm mostly going to be using the lighter green portion. So you can hang on to these. They're great for stock. You can julienne these leaf greens and fry them actually, and they make, it's almost like onion strings. They're really delicious. What I'm going to do with these is make kind of leek medallions to put in and around the quiche. So I'm going to cut them pretty thick. Just about an inch. And then I'll show you what we do with them at that point. Great, so I have my leek medallions here, and I'm just going to put them on a skillet. So I'm turning my heat on to about 6 out of 10. I'm going to add some olive oil to my pan and let that heat up. And I'm just going to basically sear these leek medallions so that they start to brown, and we'll end up with kind of a cool spiral pattern on them, and then they can just be stuck in the quiche just like that, and they will continue to tenderize as the quiche cooks. So that'll be you know, they'll be nice and tender and delicious by the time the quiche is baked. But for now, I'm basically just gonna put color on them as soon as that oil is ready. Okay, so it seems like our pan is nice and preheated now. So I'm just gonna take these guys and start setting them in the oil. This pan is kind of rounded at the center, so that's kind of the noise you want, just a light sizzle there. And we're just gonna let these cook for a few minutes on each side so we get that nice browning. You can see the centers will kind of pop up as the steam escapes. It's always kind of funny to me. All right, so let's take a look at these. Grab some tongs here. Starting to get a little bit of color. Okay, so I'm just starting to kind of flip these guys over now. You can see we're starting to get a little color on them, which is all that we want. Kind of highlight the spiral structure. That one looks nice there. So you can see this nice, beautiful, it's almost like the center of a tree, which I think is just so lovely. And all that I'm trying to do in this process is to kind of highlight that. Plus they smell good. They're going to taste lovely. So there's kind of a close-up of what we're working for here. Another nice one there. And then I'm going to lower my heat a little bit. The last thing that I'm going to want to put in my quiche is some greens. I really like spinach or kale. Arugula is really nice. Just kind of whatever greens you like. So in this same pan, I'm just gonna wilt some greens really quick. So I have some baby kale that I'll be using. Just like this. And if you've never cooked greens before, just know they do reduce in size a lot, so you can be kind of aggressive with the amount that you use. It will cook down significantly. You can see they're already starting to. And you can add seasonings to this, garlic. I'll probably do a little bit of salt and pepper here, just a touch. And then I think I'm actually going to add a little bit of white wine right at the end. Kind of deglaze them and to add an extra little pop. Plus, not that I need one, but it's a great excuse to open today's can of wine. So I just added a little bit here. I'm just going to let it reduce. I can even shut my heat off at this point because it's already almost gone. And I have some nice kale ready to go in my quiche. I always like to add a lot of veggies to my quiche. You can definitely do, a lot of different cool things with meat. I enjoy a really good vegetable quiche. I think that they just have so much flavor and great textures, and then I feel a little bit better about eating something that's like mostly cream and butter if there's some nutrients in there. So that's my philosophy with quiche most of the time. But yeah, I think that this is going to be a really lovely one. So our quiche shell at this point should be pretty well chilled. It's been in the freezer for like 20 minutes. So what we need to do now is a process that's called blind baking or par baking. So we're baking the pie shell, the quiche shell rather, but we're not baking it until it's completely done. We're only going to do it about maybe 40% of the way. And what this is going to do is it's going to prevent it from getting soggy or from being undercooked by the time our quiche custard is cooked. But it's not going to make it dry or anything like that. It's basically just the crust itself will take longer to fully cook than the quiche will. So we're going to give it a head start, and then we'll fill it with all of our delicious quiche stuff, and then we can finish it off with everything all together. So in order to properly blind bake something, got our beautiful shell here. It's nice and chilled. It's pretty much frozen, which is totally fine. Don't be afraid of that. What we can do with this is we're going to line it with some parchment and fill it with some sort of weight. So my favorite thing is just rice. Once you use rice for this purpose, you don't want to try and then eat it. Don't try and make sushi or something like that. It's going to be disappointing. But rice makes a really great, super cheap pie weight. You can use it again and again and again. So there's no need to invest in like ceramic fancy pie weights for anything. That's definitely not something that you need to take on for something as simple as baking a pie. So, or a quiche in this case, I suppose. I'm just going to grab some parchment. And for these purposes, you can definitely cut it to the size of your quiche. I'm just not even going to bother. I'm just going to press it in here. You want it to come all the way to the top because we need to fill it all the way to the top with pie weight. If we only put it on the bottom, then what's going to happen is the sides are just going to shrink down into the center, and we're not going to have a good border. So we have to fill the shell all the way to the top. Just like a conspiracy, it goes all the way to the top. So here, I have my weight in there. Very good, very good. I just like to press it around, make sure that I've really gotten into all of those edges. And this is really going to help bake it up really nicely. And then this can go into the oven for probably 20 to 30 minutes. We just want it to be kind of a light golden brown on the edges, but still very pale in the center. So here is a mini one that is par baked. So I definitely have some browning on the bottom, which is great. No soggy bottoms here, but you can see it's kind of just barely kissed with color on the border. The sides are still very pale, and the bottom is still very pale, but it's not raw. So that's what we don't want to have Gordon Ramsay screaming at us about our quiche crust. So that's why we're doing this process of par baking it. So I'm going to pop it in the oven. And it seems like our mushrooms and tomatoes are coming along nicely. Take those out for you to take a look. Here's all of this stuff roasting up nicely. For this, the roasting is more for flavor than anything. By kind of reducing the juices out of the mushrooms and the tomato, we're concentrating the flavors. So I'm not so worried about like trying to actually cook it because it's also going to be baked. But I do want some really nice flavors coming out of here. So that's why I'm bothering with this process at all. You can also do like seared, sauteed mushrooms, which is normally what I would do, but I wanted to do roasted tomatoes too, so it's pretty easy to just do all that on the same pan. I'm just going to put all my mushrooms in the center here and make sure they're tossed in the oil. You don't want to scorch any of them. Mix them around, and then I'll throw this back in the oven for probably another 20 to 30 minutes. Should keep right on track with our blind baked crust. So the final thing that I wanted to show you guys for brunch is something that is so simple. This is like a very easy go-to like breakfast thing on any weekend. It's basically just as easy as pancakes. Probably takes about the same amount of time. Certain parts of it are even easier than pancakes. So that's just a classic cream scone. It's very, very basic, but super delicious. You can really add a lot of variety. There's a lot of room to get creative with them. So let me just show you the recipe here. So the cream scone, there's no egg, there's no butter. There are recipes of scones with egg and butter. You are welcome to use those. They take a little bit more time and energy, but they will put out a really delicious end product. This is just a very classic, simple go-to. It's flour, sugar, baking powder, a touch of salt, and then cream. And to these ones, I'm adding some lemon zest. You are free to add lemon zest, lime zest, orange zest, grapefruit. You can do poppy seeds. You can do Earl Grey tea. You can do whatever you want in these, whatever sounds great to you. You can also coat them in seeds when you get ready to bake them. You could do sesame ones. You could do sesame matcha powder scones. Whatever sounds good to you, you make it happen. Today, I am going to be making scones with a little bit of lemon zest in them, and then they're going to be filled with a raspberry jam and some of the lemon curd that we made earlier. So I am just going to show you really quickly how these come together. We have flour. We have sugar here. I have my salt and my baking powder both in this guy. And then I have some lemon zest. I have some cream, and to my cream I've added just a couple dashes of vanilla, probably like half a teaspoon tops. And that is just gonna add like a nice note. It's not necessary. It's not gonna make or break your scone. So if you don't have any of that, don't worry. So for our scones, very, very simple. To our flour, we're going to add the rest of our dry ingredients. So I've got my sugar in there, baking powder and salt, okay? And I'm just gonna give those a quick mix. And then I'm also going to dump in my zest. And for this much, I just do like 1 lemon's worth of zest. But you can adjust that to taste however much you want in there. And I just try and get that zest really moved around. You can mix your zest in with your sugar actually to kind of distribute it nice and evenly. It is kind of moist, so it might want to stick to the flour a little bit. But I find that this works just fine. So once everything is kind of really well mixed together, we're going to pour in our cream. And this is a pretty wet cream scone mix. You can make it a little drier a lot of times. Most of the time I don't even measure the cream, I just eyeball it. But all I'm doing here is a very similar thing to what I did with the Pate Brisee, which is I'm just bringing it together. I don't want to knead it. I don't want to form any gluten if I can help it. I just want it to come together. And at the point that it has done that, I'm done mixing. And we're just going to scoop it out and get it ready to bake. So I'm even just kind of like rotating it in the bowl, because there are some really wet, sticky parts, and there are still some like drier parts. So I'm just trying to get those two to hang out together, become friends. Maybe, I don't know, check out a few investment properties, go into a timeshare, whatever they want to do. I just need them to hang out to become one. Okay, great. And I'm just kind of going to press it together, make sure it's all one unit here. And then there are a few things you can do at this point. I want to fill my scones. So I want like a round shape that I can put a well in the middle of and fill. A lot of people like the classic rounded or wedge shape. So To make that, you form your dough into a ball. You're gonna roll it out into a circle, and then you just cut it like a pizza to make that kind of classic wedge scone shape. You can also roll it out and punch it with cookie cutters. That works pretty great. Whatever you want to do with your scones. They're great with whipped cream or creme fraiche. They're great with fresh fruit. You can use them as the base for like a breakfast sandwich. Just know that they are sweeter. They have a fair amount of sugar in them. But you could make kind of a sweet breakfast sandwich. You can even use them for something like strawberry shortcake. This is a pretty versatile dough here. So yeah, it's a nice soft dough. Everything's pretty well incorporated. Again, I don't want to knead it. I just want to pick up all of that dry stuff and kind of like get it incorporated. But once it is, I'm done. And I am done. So, just gonna rub all the dough off my hand here, best that I can. And then here I have a scoop like this. You can use a spoon. You can even just like pick it up with your hands and make a ball, whatever you want to do. I'm going to use this scoop since I have it and since these are being donated. But yeah, I just have like a nice ball like that. And scoop out my batter here. This is a pretty big scoop. I would say that standard, this recipe would make 8 regular scones. This scoop I think is like 3 1/4 ounces, so I might not quite get 8, which is fine. Scones are another thing that like to be cold, so use cold cream. And then if you feel like your mix has gotten warm in the process, you know, pop them in the freezer, pop them in the fridge. That's great. All right. It looks like I will have a little baby one here for me to sample, because quality control is very important. Don't underestimate the importance of quality control. We gotta make sure that these products are representative of your brand. And my brand is haphazard, but delicious. So, gotta make sure we nail the delicious part. Leave them some room. Don't pack them in too tightly. They will spread a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and pop these in the freezer for just a few minutes. I want them to cool off a little bit. They feel a little warm and soft to me. So I'm just going to chill them for a few minutes before I bake. Okay, so it has been about 23 minutes at this point that we have been par-baking our crust. So I'm going to pull it out and take a look. Usually I like to lift the weights out and then bake it for another few minutes just to kind of dry it out. Sometimes the butter will settle under the weights, and I want it to dry a little bit at the bottom, but I'll show you how it's looking. I think it's going great. So, hard to see from here, but if I lift up the parchment You can see our border is still really well intact. It's starting to get a kiss of color. So I am going to go ahead and remove the rice. Careful you don't burn yourself when you do this. This stuff is hot, of course, coming out of the oven. But yeah, you can see how it's, it just kind of like wetter down here at the bottom. It looks a little more saturated and not like dry and flaky like it is up top. So we're gonna put it back in the oven just to dry the bottom of the crust out. But we've really kept the shape nicely. I don't think this crust is gonna fall on us at all, and it should be a really beautiful end product. So back in she goes for about another 3 to 5 minutes. I'm gonna do 5. And then while I am doing that, I will show you how to prep the scones. We don't want to bake the scones and the quiche at the same time anyways, because I don't want my scones to taste like garlic. Maybe you do, that's fine, no judgment. But I don't want mine to taste that way, so I'm going to show you how I do it. So I am saving most of the scones that I scooped today because, as I mentioned before, I'm going to be building a bunch of brunch baskets for folks for this Mother's Day. So I'm just going to bake off a couple to show you how to do that and what it looks like. But these have just been cooling in the freezer. They're definitely not frozen, but they're nice and chilled, which is exactly where I want them. Exactly where I want them. And then I just have a little bit of egg wash here. Which is just eggs that have been really well blended. You can add 1 egg and 1 yolk. You can do egg and water. You can do egg and cream, whatever you like for your egg wash. Just make sure you get one on there. It's really going to help with the color. It'll help them hold the shape, and it'll give them a nice shine. Plus, I happen to like adding raw sugar or seeds, things like that to the outside of my scones to give them a nice crunch. So this time, because it's Mother's Day, and in the spirit of spring and frankly just bringing a little color to an otherwise gray moment of our lives, I have gotten some like colorful sprinkles that I'm going to add to the top, which is basically going to bake up just the same as raw sugar, but with more fun, because that's what I need in my life right now. So, got my sprinkles on top, beautiful. And then these are ready to bake. So as soon as that quiche crust comes out, I'm going to put these in, and I'm not going to fill them just yet. I want the scones to start actually baking and drying out a little bit before I fill them with lemon curd. Otherwise, it could take a really long time for them to bake. They won't bake super evenly. The curd also might kind of leak out everywhere, because the way that we're going to do it is to just basically punch a hole in the top of the scone and fill it up. And we need a crust to have already formed so that it holds everything in place and will look really nice as an end product. So yeah, we are going to bake these halfway through, which will be about 10 minutes at 350. And then we will fill them and finish them for another 7 to 10 minutes after that. So that's the plan for these guys. Very simple, very straightforward, but like a really nice product. And especially if you jazz it up with a little bit of color, or some really beautiful lemon curd and raspberry jam, these are gonna be just like a wonderful delectable treat for Mother's Day or any other weekend brunch. They come together so quickly, they're so easy, and they're so versatile. They're another thing that will like last a day or two if you want to wrap it up and send it to someone, or carry it out for a picnic, something like that. They're a great, not too sweet, but just sweet enough sort of treat to take along with you somewhere. All right, let's take a peek at our quiche crust. Da-da-da. Aha. Wonderful. So, this is kind of what happens if you don't weigh it down. It bubbles up in the middle. I'm not sure how visible that is. But since I've already par baked it, that's fine. I'm really not worried about that. I'm just gonna punch that down a little bit. It's really just the top layer of the crust that's doing that bubbling as the steam escapes. And I think it's still just a little, it should feel pretty firm at this point, and it still feels just a little soft to me. I want it to have a little bit more rigidity to it, so I'm gonna do like another 3 minutes, but because I don't have any garlic in this part, I'm gonna go ahead and throw the scones in with it too, and they will be fine, but we can get those going. Let's take a look at our quiche crust one last time. Looking good. It definitely bubbled up a little bit again, but that's fine. We are going to press it back down here. And that definitely feels a lot more firm, like it's a lot more baked to me, so I'm super happy with that. And we can start building it now while our scones are continuing to bake. So I like to kind of start my quiche off with a layer of cheese. I like having some cheese at the bottom, not just on top. And I do find that it also helps to kind of like seal the crust a little bit. I'm not going to put a ton, and it's still warm, so it'll probably want to start melting right away, but just enough to make sure that that flavor comes through. And it'll kind of create a seal down there at the bottom. Great. Pretty simple. Let's see, where is this more visible? There. And then I have the roasted tomatoes and mushrooms, which look really delicious. The mushrooms haven't gotten tiny, but they've definitely like expelled a lot of their liquid, which is great because some of that will still remain in the quiche, but it won't make it too watery. Same with the tomatoes. I've cooked out a lot of the liquid, but they're not totally dried out. They're just gonna be kind of nice and jammy, which will be lovely. So I think I'm gonna start by layering these on the bottom. And as you're building your quiche, you know, just kind of think about like where things are going to like sit the best, what's gonna give you an even distribution of your ingredients as you cut into stuff. You can think about some stylistic things, which will really matter more at the top than at this point. And then next, I think I'm gonna throw my greens in here that we wilted a little bit. Just kind of get those nice and spread around. I am excited about eating this, buddy. It's gonna be so good. Great. So it's important to cook your ingredients a little bit first for that reason. We're making a custard here, So I don't want a ton, especially when you're working with vegetables, I don't want a ton of the water that naturally exists in vegetables cooking out into this and keeping my custard from setting. That would be unfortunate and not desirable. So I'm just going to sprinkle my mushrooms in. You know, people have strong feelings about mushrooms, and I am strongly pro mushroom. I think that they are delicious. I quite like the texture of them. And just generally a fan, honestly. And I'm not packing the ingredients in. I want the custard, when I pour it in, to be able to kind of go in between all of these different layers. I don't just want everything sitting at the bottom. That would not make for a very nice texture or flavor distribution, and it also won't bake as well. I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of cheese on top here. Delish. Okay, and then comes the custard. So I have some that I have already aged because I'm making a lot of these. So it's that same one. It's the roasted garlic and sage. And maybe I'll just shake it up a little bit here first. Make sure it's all really well mixed. Don't want my eggs sinking to the bottom. Cha-cha-cha-cha-cha. All right. Beautiful. And I'm going to pour my custard in slowly and gently so that it fills up all those little nooks and crannies. Okay, right up to the top, really. I'm just going to let this set for a second. The timer is going off for the scones, so I'm going to hit pause on quiche while we fill our scones, because I think they should be ready for that now. Oh, let's see, maybe a couple more minutes first. They still look really, really soft. They haven't really formed a crust yet, so I'm going to say another 5 minutes before I fill them, actually. I usually bake them in a convection oven, so they move a little faster. But this time around, they are just in my regular old conventional oven. So I have my beautiful little leek medallions here that I quite like the look of, and I'm just going to kind of place these in and around. So they're kind of going to set right on top here. Which means they should be visible once the quiche is baked. Which is great. That's what I'm going for. And they'll also be quite tasty. And I'm just pressing them in so that they're basically level with the surface. It is best to bake your quiche on a sheet pan of some sort, just in case there's any dripping, or it will tend to kind of dome up in the baking process, and it will also make it a lot easier to rotate it around, so you can just grab the edge of the sheet tray instead of trying to wrestle with the quiche. So let's see, can I fit any of these tomatoes in here? Maybe I'll move this center guy over a little bit. And plop a nice tomato on top. This is where you can get a little creative with how it looks. Add a little bit of style. I often put fresh sage leaves on top. I think that those look really nice. So that's something that I'll do a lot of times. In over there, huh? I like a nice loaded up quiche, but don't feel obligated to go this buck wild with your own. I am known for making too much, frankly. So, great. Well, that way I got to use everything. And he's ready to go in. But we're gonna hold off on that just a few minutes until our scones are done. But here is the quiche ready to bake. It will probably take 40 minutes to an hour. I will show you what doneness looks like and what to look for in finding that. But depending on how thick your custard is, how big of a quiche you're making, how deep it is, and then how much filling there is in it, it will vary a little bit, but I'm guessing this one's going to be 40 minutes to an hour. And let's take a look at our scones. So, here they are. That's looking better, like we've got a little bit more of a crust. They feel a little firmer on the outside, which is good. We need that if we're gonna fill them, and we are. So if you have like a little scoop, or I'm just gonna use kind of like a measuring spoon here. This was actually for measuring coffee, but I like the nice round shape of it. And I am just literally going to press it in here and make a little well for me to fill. You can see it's still really doughy on the inside here, so these are going to need at least another 10 minutes to bake up. So yeah, I want to make sure that it gets fully cooked and everything, but we're going to fill it first. So I have some beautiful lemon curd, just like we made. You can see it's thick enough to stand up on the spoon, kind of like ice cream, really lovely texture. And I'm just going to put some in the center here and fill up my little guy too. And then I also wanted to add some raspberry jam to these guys. So I've just got a little piping bag here, and I'm going to attempt to do a little design with it in the name of Mother's Day. We'll see how it goes. But my thinking is that maybe I will be able to make a little flower design. There, that sort of worked. I'll take it. And back into the oven these go for about another 10 minutes. And then we'll see how they look when they come out. Here we go. All right, so let's take a look at our scones here. Ooh, looking very cute. Here they are. I don't know how well you can see the flower shape here that came out. Very cute. I'm quite happy with that. I don't know, I feel like they're still just, as I'm squeezing them, they feel just a little bit tender in the center. And I know I added in that liquid with the curd and everything. So I think I'm gonna give them just another few minutes. But they're baking up beautifully. And I think that that's gonna be a really nice treat for Mother's Day. So I think 3 more minutes and those will be done. All right, so I just pulled the scones out of the oven and I'm excited for you to take a look. I am going to pop them out, make them a little more visible for the design aspect, but I think these are really fun. And here they are. So I managed to get kind of a flower design in the middle with the raspberry jam and the lemon curd. We've got our fun sprinkles. I don't know if you can see, but there is kind of a light golden brown, and then the bottom is definitely brown as well. So that's what you're looking for. They feel firm, they feel set in the middle. They're not like too squishy. They shouldn't be totally dried out or crusty. But you don't want raw dough in the middle. Not that it's going to hurt you, but it's not going to taste very nice and it's not going to be a very nice texture, especially up against this beautiful lemon curd that we have here. So yeah, really happy with how these turned out. You know, the shape itself is kind of rustic, but you can really jazz it up with those sprinkles and a little artistic pizzazz with your fillings. And yeah, it's a really simple, beautiful end product. So happy with those. We'll definitely be sending those out with my Mother's Day packages, and hopefully you guys can have some fun with it too. So the quiche is in the oven and it's probably going to be another 30 to 45 minutes, and we'll take a look at it as it goes along. All right, it is time to pull our quiche out of the oven. So I'm going to show you what that looks like and what to look for. So this baked for, I think it was about 45 minutes. It looks great. Let me just angle down here. So this is our quiche. It domed a bit on top, but you can see when I shake it, it just has like a little uniform jiggle. It's not sloshing. The custard is definitely setting up. It's very tender, but this will totally set up, especially after it spends a little bit of time in the fridge. If you want to make yours day of, just give it a solid hour to cool before you try and cut into it. And I would put it in the fridge for like 15 minutes. Even if you want to serve it warm, it'll just make it so much easier to cut. This is a pretty delicate custard. But I think that this came out beautifully. It looks really inviting and delicious, and it smells great, so I'm excited to dive in. But that is how it's done. And just one last note, if you notice that your crust, the edge of your crust is getting too brown and your custard isn't done yet, you can go ahead and wrap this part in foil. Just the crust, don't cover the whole thing, just cover the crust in foil, and that will protect it from over browning while the rest of this cooks up. So that's my last little pro tip there. But yeah, that is your Mother's Day brunch in a nutshell, a very, very large nutshell. But I hope that this was helpful and that everyone has a wonderful weekend celebrating nurturing and caretaking and caregiving, and you know, all of those things that make motherhood that beautiful, wonderful experience that we all crave and need. And it's definitely something worth celebrating. So I hope everyone enjoys it, and I look forward to seeing you guys at the next one. Mwah.